Knapp. I'm the McCosh curator here at the JSMA, and I was the in-house curator for this exhibition, Visual Magic, and worked very closely with George Green and Jeri Hise and members of the George D. Green Art Institute, a wonderful group of artists who participated in this show, and we're so happy to now be presenting our fourth public gallery tour today on the topic of the human figure. And that's just a jumping off point for comments that the artists might choose to make about their work or their career, whatever they'd like to share with us. We certainly don't have to limit our conversation or questions to the human figure, but it's a wonderful common thread that runs through the works of the presenting artists, who are Laura Ross Paul and Jeri Hise and Gorege Johanson and Connie Kiener. So thank you so much all for being here today. I just ask that because we do have a nice sized group, I'm glad you're all here. We have chairs if you need them, so let our staff know if you need a chair. Just be really mindful, please, of all the art on the walls and the three-dimensional objects as we move around in the gallery. And we will start in this corner and look at Laura's work behind me here, and then turn slightly to look at Jeri's work. And then we'll ask that you move your chairs, and we'll resituate ourselves more centrally in the gallery as we make our way around. So for each artist, we might just wait a moment before we start talking to let our camera guy get set up. And I also wanted to share with you that this show, if you weren't already aware, is only on view for 1 week longer. May 12th is the last day on view, which is really unbelievable to me and maybe to the rest of us who are involved in the show, because so much time went into planning it. It's been on view since January. We've had a parade of visitors and artists and students come through. Just this past week, we had students in a geography class called Exploring Oregon come to look at landscapes and think about artist perspectives of capturing landscapes, and a number of other classes. And so that's been wonderful to share the work of artists with sort of shared heritage in Oregon with our university communities. I've asked each artist to talk for maybe 10 to 15 minutes about his or her work, and then we can maybe take 1 or 2 questions in front of the work, and then we'll move along through the gallery. But I certainly welcome you to stay longer after sort of that formal hour 15 minutes is done, and have more conversations if you'd like. I'll be here, and I think all of our artists are probably willing to stick around a little bit. And the last thing I'll mention too is that some of the other artists whose work is on view in the show are also here, even if they're not presenting as part of today's tour. I saw Betts Cole and Robert Dizano and a few other people. So, if you're interested, Sue Del McCullough. So certainly, if you were interested in work in the show, chances are the artist might be here with us. So that's enough from me. I'm going to hand it over to Laura Ross Paul. Thank you so much for being here today. We're excited to hear about the human figure.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Danielle and Jeri and George, and I am so thrilled to be in this show. If you haven't read it, there's a couple of really wonderful essays in the catalog that kind of makes me proud to be a member of the 50 years from 1968 is the theme of one of the essays. So I think magic is really the right word to call the show, visual magic, and I think it kind of comes from our all coming of age around that time and getting a lot of our careers going. So is there any chance that the grad student that wrote the signage is here? No? Okay. Well, I love that the grad students in art history write the signage, and I love what she said about me because she mentions my activism in college that started then, and I know we're at U of O, but I went to school in 1968. I started at Oregon State, and yay, go Duck, or go Beaver. My daughter went here, so anyway, activism is kind of what got me going as an artist, and particularly as a figurative artist. In the spring of 1968, there was a lot of protesting going on against the Vietnam War and some other social issues at the time. And an underground newspaper got started, which was a popular thing to do in the day. And I got enlisted to be the artist for that newspaper. In fact, the newspaper really kind of depended heavily on that artwork because it folded once I left. So, but Oregon State had a terrific library about political art. And so the one thing I found out by studying that is something I use in all my figurative work today, and that is the importance of facial expression and body language. You can do so much with those two things to communicate, and I do spend a lot of time on it. So I'm going to start with this painting. Well, I don't know, I'll kind of talk about both of them. I've taught figurative painting for a long time at Portland State, and one of the things that I tell my students is to get into a painting, you often use either your brain or your heart or both, you know, emotion or some intellectual thought or conceptual thought, and you want to have those kind of in balance, but usually there's one that's the starter button, and for me it's definitely emotions. And so what I have used, actually in both the paintings, but I'll start with this one, besides what I just told you, the facial expression and the body language, I like to use also color and mark making. And with the mark making, I like kind of soft, ephemeral marks, but I also like muscular, sort of capture the chi energy marks. And I like to have those in a balance. And in it's kind of the yin and the yang of a painting, and so many of the artists here do the same thing. As far as color, I think color kind of in a painting is similar to what music is in a movie. It sort of tells you the emotion to have for that scene, and so that's how I think of color. And I'm a long-term meditator and often see colors, but you know, I came from the 60s, so you know, I know how to use my brain that way. But I often assign emotions, and it truly is emotions that is the centering device that get me into a painting. And right after that, then I look for the right facial expression and body language to convey that. And then marks, this one is not a color painting, but it is has a lot of marks. I've been several times, well, 4 times to China recently, and when I was there, I really got to see some terrific calligraphy. And so it got me thinking of a different type of mark, and I've been working with sumi ink and sometimes walnut ink on this mineral paper, which is paper made out of rock. It's made out of marble, and it has a binder, and it takes the ink really nice. So I get to do the soft and the muscular marks within the strokes. And working in black and white, I really think, you know, because of the rods and the cones in your eyes, there's a certain way that dark and light convey color, even though it's not color. And if you're an artist, you'll know what I mean. But anyway, sometimes I like to work in dark and light just for that reason. So for this one, I put down watercolor on that mineral paper first, and it was very soft and ephemeral. And then I worked into it with the oil on top. And the thing I love about this mineral paper is that you can't do that on anything made of cotton or something that will be destroyed by oil, but you can on this mineral paper. So you can layer those two things, and I was excited. I look for the light and the luminosity patterns first, and often I put things down and just kind of roll them so there's chance, and you know, marks happen that you couldn't do with the brush, and then I layer it. And sometimes, like I told you, facial expression's important for me, so I'll spend, you know, day where the whole thing may get laid out quickly. I might spend days on just getting the right facial expression or body language, and then as soon as I'm done with that, I can get loose again. So there's sort of tight and loose going on, and it's layered. And so I like them always to be in natural environments, and I like them to have parts that echo the nature, you know, so like the straight lines echoing these straight lines, so they get embedded. And with, you know, the figures here are like some curviness that get echoed in the other curvy lines. And I think the main thing for a composition, no matter how big the painting is, I always try to take it to what would work with a postage stamp size. So, you know, circle, straight line. I mean, that's basically how I do compositions. So, you know, I like to go complex out of simplicity. So I think I'm probably time's up. But I mean, I left a few minutes for questions if anybody has any, yeah.
I was just wondering, were you trying to make a statement with the young man with the colors, where they are on his drawing?
The hot hands? Yeah, thank you. That's, remember I said that I start by emotion? Well, for this one, I've worked with these twins that were models for a long time, and they're kind of, well, they were kind of semi-street kids, and they, would sometimes be a little camp, like act serious, but, just like, look at you. And it was an expression I liked because he was really willing to look me right in the eye and just have his hands there. So he's just trying to be straightforward with no body language to give a indication. But what echoed in my mirror, in my mind, and what I was picking up on is when I'm really observing something and concentrating on observation, I get a tingle in my hands, and that's happens, and I have to express them some way. And so for me, it's art. I've heard musicians say the same thing. So how do I kind of give a visual to it? Somebody's called my work, I'm a good psychological landscape type painter. And so there's a psychological part, like how are you gonna depict that you feel this hotness in your hands? But I actually call it having a hot hand. Like, I imagine, I've been watching the Blazers, and I imagine there's days that you just hit. So if I'm painting away and all of a sudden I realize I have a hot hand going, I'll push myself to go longer, do more tricky stuff. And then other days I just don't have it. But I have noticed that, like if we're traveling or something, it's really important to take a drawing book or something going just so that there's that hand-eye connection, so that my hand's semi-lukewarm when I get going. So anyway, that's how I interpret it. I know there could be sort of a bloodiness or a scariness or something, and I don't mind visiting that edge because I like to have something universal enough that a viewer can take their own experience. So if they want to, this guy's just murdered somebody and that's their thing, how to interpret it, that's okay with me, but that's not how I intended it, so. And, sometimes that gives it a bit of an edge, but anyway, okay. Uh-huh.
You mentioned that your origins at LSU started out with an interest in political art, and does that still carry through? I don't know if it's so much that I am embedded in politics in America right now that I see it in everything, or how is that for you as the painter?
Well, I'll answer it this way because I've been, I was really passionate and kind of like was on one side against the war and used my skill for that. Right now, I'm sort of so sick of everybody going at each other that I'm really looking for something that's universal. And this was kind of related to a series I have going that I'm very deeply into right now about breath, because I looked for the one thing that we all have in common, and I came up with, we all have to breathe, and you and I could be on opposite sides politically or other ways, but maybe we share some of the same oxygen. It keeps you alive, it keeps me alive, and so this being underwater, I'm doing it differently, but it was related to that thought. So I don't know if that's being political or not. I think I would say it's being humanitarian or not.
We're all living in the same world as well, that it somehow comes out.
Yeah. Well, I think my embedding it in nature and having figures somehow coordinate. That's why I love those twins. They were just intuitively coordinated with each other all the time. Whatever they were doing, they were responding to what the other was doing. And I think all my work, it had to give the big over thing, it's our interconnectedness. I mean, if I was doing an art of statement about what connects everything I've ever done, it's our interconnectedness with nature and with each other. And I think every series I've ever done starts with that, so. Yeah. Yes.
You always work from a model?
What a great question. But I have taught life drawing forever. So, and when I had kids, you know, 3 kids I was raising, I just didn't have time to hire models. So, you know, I could come up, all that figurative work was just done from whatever I want. But I have a full-length mirror in my studio, so I will pose for myself, you know, like, I'm not getting that leg right. How do, you know, because I can feel the body language I want, you know, and it's hard for me to find models that will work with me. But when I find somebody that I you know, they'll get in the right pose, I either draw them or take photo reference. But with my photo references, you know, they're great because you get that second, but maybe something isn't right about it. The torso is, but the legs aren't, or whatever. So what I say is, yeah, I'm going to take some photo reference, but I'm going to take an arm from here and a leg from there. And usually I kind of come up with it on my own. But sometimes I stick to the photo reference, but not always. But I hope that helps you. I probably, what do you think? Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
This to the non-model, I would say. My models are models of paintings from the 17th century, which I became very interested in when I was attending Smith College. And part of what intrigued me about the 17th century was just the beginning of the scientific revolution and the discoveries of everything that we take for granted now, corpuscles and blood and how things move and how the moon looks and is there a man on the moon, and it was just a phenomenally huge time. And so I became very interested in the idea of well, in this case, I brought together several disparate things together that I thought would be interesting. And one of the things that happened also before my Smith College experience, George and I, my husband, really liked Vermeer, and so I, as a joke, asked him if he would prepare a panel for me with a picture frame that he could do with his trompe-l'oeil painting, and he said, sure. So I painted, I didn't tell him what I was doing, but I painted a milkmaid, a similar milkmaid for him, and presented it and said, here's your Vermeer milkmaid, and this became this kind of joke. So I began thinking about trying to make her really larger and think about who she was. She probably actually was a young woman in the kitchen making bread pudding. We don't know for sure. And so I was interested in doing that, and then my granddaughter had sent me a couple of cutouts of a cyclops. She lives in Greece, and she sent me paper doll cutouts. In this case, it was a sheet of here that has a cyclops eye, neck, head, and body. And I just thought that was so wonderful, and I always wanted to figure out how I could work it into a painting. And also she did a painting of the cyclops that she sent to me. So as I began to work on the Vermeer portrait painting of the milkmaid, and studying more about him and about Leeuwenhoek, who is sort of figured in this area here, and I decided that maybe I could make the milkmaid turn into a paper doll. And so I added the little tabs, and then it became a more playful painting, and just things kind of came about. And this is to depict a page. This is a page. These are pieces of a paper doll cutout that can be put into the painting if you wanted. And this is where the paper doll is cut out from, and through that then is the illusion of a sky with clouds and all. And then Mondrian, who I love, and is so opposite, so disparate from Vermeer, and with the colors and the coordinating of the colors and all, I just thought it would be a neat thing to kind of put together and maybe make it seem, well, interesting or astonishing. So I built this slowly as sort of a collage area. This is the moon. This is an image of the moon that I saw in Mosier when one evening the light caught just the edge of a crater, and it looked like it was a handle. So this moon has appeared as an archetypal thing in many of my paintings. And then I thought a cow might be kind of fun to put jumping over. The Earth, Mars is down here. And then I also, when I was at Smith College, I had the opportunity to spend time with cuneiform tablets, and I was quite moved by those tablets and the ancientness and the beginning of the printed word or the page and all that. So I incorporated some of this. This is an olive branch under here, Leeuwenhoek's bacterial bugs and things and sperm and all that he discovered through his use of the lenses and all. And Galileo, of course, uses lenses looking up to the sky, whereas Leeuwenhoek looked down inside. And one of the people I would now like to maybe paint is a woman named Margaret Cavendish, who was kind of a nut person during that time, but she really liked Leeuwenhoek and liked the idea of slicing through into things so that you could see closer and closer and closer. And I think that Leeuwenhoek and Margaret Cavendish probably would have really loved an electron microscope if they had been able to have that. So I added little landscapes. This is a landscape from Greece, from my mind, and this is a recurring landscape, kind of a, I guess you would call it a swamp or a bog area that always is in my dream works. Here are little landscapes here and sky. So it was just, I guess, a kind of joyful painting that I had fun doing that I really, really like. Leeuwenhoek lived probably right across the street from Vermeer and may very well have known one another. I do know that he was the estate executor for Vermeer when he died. And Leeuwenhoek's father was a basket weaver. I don't know if this is actually a basket that in the painting that Vermeer did that Leeuwenhoek's father had made. So just pulling together some of this history during this amazing time, it was just fun for me to do. Very, very fun. So moving along this is a painting that I did. It was one that Rembrandt did of a man named Herman Du Mer. Herman Du Mer, I discovered after I saw this, I just loved this painting, and I thought this would be fun to try to see if I could incorporate this into a painting. I found out later that he was a picture framer. Well, I used to be a picture framer, so he spoke to me, of course. So I found what a picture framing hammer looked like back in the 17th century, and so I painted that on a panel. This is a piece of molding that is from a family home that was being remodeled in Nescoen. So I just happened to think that this red was pretty nice, and then I had extra red, and so I swooshed up there to put more energy into this painting. The fun of this, for me, or the most amazing thing, really was getting it to a certain point and realizing I thought maybe I was almost finished, and like Vermeer, took my little tiny white dot and put it in his eyes and here, and stood back, and all the hair stood up on my neck as it just came alive for me. It was really very moving. Picasso is also, this is, I think, funny because it's pushed in against him. Absolutely nothing to do with this painting whatsoever. And I like the idea of pushing things together and making it stop people in their tracks. So they'll look and go, well, why is that there? What does that mean? Inadvertently, as a kind of a magical thing, talking about visual magic, I didn't realize that this did this until I actually put them together and screwed them together and went, oh my goodness, look at that. So it just came right on into this sort of thing like this. So let's see, what else to say? I guess what I want to say about the show is that it's really been a cosmic convergence, in my opinion, of all of these incredible paintings and people. And every time I come into this show, I'm just thrilled. The colors and the variety and the energy, and it's just been an amazing experience. And so I think that's what I have to say. Questions? Okay, moving right along.
I don't mean to be critical, you can refuse to answer. I'm not a painter, but I'm very, very, very much into art and another form of art and art history. And so it always fascinates me the meticulous, to me, every painting like this is magic. And that's why I used to do tours here and say, I'm speechless. The detail and the meticulousness that someone would go to and spend that much time to get something so accurate, you know? And I just wondered if you had anything to say about that. Why, it's going to sound really brass, but why do you make art?
Well, excuse me. I guess I don't feel like I really have much of a choice. I get unhappy and nervous, and I like to make things. It's what I do, and I can't imagine not making things. And like Lori says, her hands get hot. Well, I guess mine do too, and I get itchy. It's like, okay, time to do this and that. And now at home I have a series of black and white drawings of my sister that I'm doing right now. So it's like I'm always working. We're always working and doing whatever it is that moves us. It's a compulsion, I guess. And yeah.
Thank you so much. And your passion shows. I appreciate it.
And I have to say, I also really love working with models, and Lori's just the best. She just is a wonderful painter. So, there we go. Thank you. Huh?
I have a quick question. The previous artist talked about her entry point to the work. Would you say that the type, are all of your paintings that you work on this merging and pushing together of disparate ideas? And I'm curious, like, do you have a particular entry point that you start?
Well, I guess they come with an idea. The entry point comes with an idea, and I'll just develop it along and bring things in together, and then all of a sudden it begins to make sense to me. She was here for the opening. She came from Greece. She's 21 years old. She's a drop-dead gorgeous young woman. In fact, she was all dressed up. And we were standing here, and I heard a woman say, "Who is that woman?" And I looked at her and I said, "She's my granddaughter." So she was thrilled to see the painting, and they kindly noticed, the staff noticed that she heard that she was my collaborator, so they gave her a name tag that said artist as well, and she was just proud as could be. So it was really fun, very special to have her here. George?
Maybe some people don't realize those drawings of Maria's occurred when she was like 3 or 4.
Yeah, she was little. Oh, yeah, no, she was not 21. She was toddling around with those. And thank you, George. That's a good thing to clear up. Yeah. So it's fun to pull things together and play, and always there's scholarships, things to study and learn and tie together, and then there's the other side of the world, which is social unrest and our beautiful land, and on it was. So that's there too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that okay?
Yeah. So if you want to take a moment to come around the corner, we'll get set up to look at Gorege Johanson's painting. Great. So we'll go ahead and start to hear from our third artist, who will probably also maybe tell us a little bit about a granddaughter in talking about this work.
Oh, yes. Thank you. Yeah, first of all, let me say how pleased I am to be in the show. And I think it's a different kind of show for Oregon, because this show is emphasizing so much more of what goes on in downstate, and not just Portland, which we're kind of used to. And even in the big Oregon annuals, they've been, for one reason or another, really emphasizing Portland. I think it's just a great pleasure to see so many people, so many artists whose work I wasn't really aware of. Is this loud enough? Okay. That being said, I want to talk a little bit about self-portraits. And I've been doing them for a lot of years. The first one that I have that I kept is I did about 11. Could I have a chair to kind of lean against a bit? Thank you. See, I've been around so long, I need something to lean on now. Thank you. That's more comfortable. So for about, since that drawing, which I worked on for a couple of hours, peering in the mirror and observing, and I think I'm really kind of impressed with what I was getting out of it, what I was looking at. I was looking out at the world, and not just at myself, but sort of really investigating who is that person in the mirror, which is, and since that time I've done lots and lots of self-portraits. So even if I've done a couple a year, I've probably done 80 self-portraits. Not all paintings, but lots of drawings and so on. This isn't all just ego. This is, the artist looks in the mirror and sees a kind of somewhat alien person, as I think a lot of us do. You sort of say, at least sometimes in your life, I'm sure, whether you're an artist or not, you say, who is that person? Who is that really? I was going to Google, where you can find out lots and lots of stuff, and I asked Google how many self-portraits Van Gogh had done. And it said, it's probably right, is that in the last 3 years of his life, which is his most productive time, he did 30 paintings of himself. That's a lot, because these aren't just slapdashed. And then I asked Google, what about Rembrandt? How many did he do? And it said that they were over 100. Probably 40 of those are paintings. And then, of course, many etchings and drawings. One of my favorite artists is Max Beckmann, who also did myriad self-portraits. And could you hold that a second?
Sure.
Oh, this is in my wallet.
I don't get to hold the
I
wallet.
ran across this, which I wrote down. Oh, thank you.
No, I'll hold it.
Okay. And Beckmann said, we don't know, meaning we, the scientific community, the world, we don't know what the self is. The self is the great veiled mystery of the world. I think that's great. And as I say, one of the reasons that artists do self-portraits is this kind of investigation of who's this funny guy in the mirror. Let me say some things directly about this painting. It's a diptych, so there are two paintings joined together. And it started out with the idea of this drawing of Louis Bunce, who was one of my mentors at the Museum Art School. And this is a drawing in pencil on canvas. And that was the first thing I did in this painting. And the rest of the painting changed quite a bit over working on it. But that stayed just as it is. It's a pencil drawing which has been fixed, so it's part of the painting. The rest of which is acrylic and oil. The right-hand side of the painting at one point wasn't working at all, and I abandoned it for a year or so, the whole painting, and put it away. And then I pulled it out and I thought, well, the idea, I still like the idea of this big vacant space and then the self-portrait on one side. So what I did was just throw that canvas away and started that image a second time and kept working on this side. One of the things for me about painting is that I paint in order to learn something, and very often the painting becomes a real struggle somewhere in there. And ones that come out well, it's sort of a wonderful result of the struggle. But it's sort of like Jacob wrestling with the angel. And he wrestles and wrestles and wrestles, and then in the morning he says, "Who are you?" I mean, he still doesn't know. He's probably been wrestling with himself. But this is what a lot of artists do, and which is my method of work anyway, is that because then something happens in the struggle that gives me something. The artist is standing drawing, and this the drawing is of my granddaughter. It's a kind of silhouette. On the right hand side it's as if it's in the studio, and these might be paintings on the wall, but they change quite a bit during the painting of it. The nude represents lots and lots of life drawing that I've done, and the nude in general to me is kind of like a symbol for art itself. There's a landscape in there with lightning coming down. I do a lot of city, sort of imaginative cityscapes. There's a silhouette in there, which again is kind of a repeat of myself, but simplified and looking like some kind of bird. In the upper right-hand corner is a rendition of rowers, and I did rowing for about 30 years, and that became a big subject matter of mine. So a couple of other things I might point out is about the painting is that the idea was to keep this area really open, but I also wanted it to be spatial. So just things like, I'll move that a bit, just adding this dimension here as if it was a shadow moving in, I think begins to make that seem like it's an inward space. And something like just adding a shadow to the edge of this form coming in turns that into some kind of painting, which is sitting on a floor rather than just floating. The head, and particularly the head, I worked on a lot, and it changed quite a bit. In general, the features are made up of a couple of triangles. One is the nose, and the other is the triangle that starts from the cheekbone and comes in to the crease above the mustache, and then the other is a kind of C shape of the mustache. So it's very much simplified in terms of what I'm giving you about the form. And if you look closely, you'll see that there are no eyes rendered in it, so that the eyes are implied. And I think when looking at the face, you don't miss them. You feel that there are eyes in there looking at you, but you're not actually seeing the rendering of any of it. So there's more that I could say about the composition and so on, but let me see if there are any questions.
I guess on the silhouette of your granddaughter, I'm just curious, you you just draw by hand and correct until you get it right, or you measure, or how do you get the proportions right when you're drawing either your face or your granddaughter's face?
It's drawn several times, and the first rendition of this was not exactly like that. It was, and nor was I thinking about my granddaughter at that point. And then I redrew it a couple of times, and if you look at the line, it's actually worked quite a bit. It changes color and it changes dimension. So it's not, I want it to look kind of free, but it's not actually, it's worked until I get it to just the right quality of line that I want. And then it began to seem like her, so then I got a photograph of her from the side, and I'd made some drawings from the side, so I made it look more like her, and it's not, again, not that specific. If you had 6 girls and you said, which one is this, you might not guess it exactly. Incidentally, out of all of this, the painting in this was the most fun to do, was the apron. And then the trick there was to leave it, leave it alone. That was fun, and it worked, so leave it. And it also is kind of suggestive, I think, of mental activity or something like that. I love things that have kind of a double reading.
I was wondering about the red, since you're wearing red and that's very red.
I like red.
Like this red really important to you?
This, yeah, I love it as an emotional color. I think it's just terrific. This is a very deep red, and it's not cadmium light at all, but it's also, and it's hard to work with cadmium red deep and give it any life, I think. What I've done is this is sandpapered back into, and then if you look at it closely, there's ink, there's oil stick that's been scrubbed into it and wiped off and painted over. So there's a lot going on in the surface, and at times it was brighter, but I kept knocking it back because I wanted that very deep rose red.
You said you used both acrylic and oil. Did you start with acrylic and then put oil on top of that, or are some portions of the work just acrylic and others oil?
Yeah, generally I start with acrylic and then move into oil. But over the years now I've gotten so I work back and forth, and so it really is mixed media, and I will paint acrylic back onto oil, which you're not supposed to do, and scrub it in and scrape it and so on. And if it doesn't come off, it's compatible. I mean, they're compatible color, and I want to make sure it doesn't peel off or anything. That's important to me, that a painting should have some kind of permanence, as permanent as I can make it. But I do unorthodox things. The only thing I can say in that defense is that I talked to a couple of curators about it, and they, I mean, not curators, restorers, and they assured me that that was okay to do. I do label the back of the painting acrylic and oil, so that if in the future someone's working on it, they know what they're dealing with. I think I should wind up now. So
Do we have time?
I'll be around. What? You want?
I was going to ask you, you said that you paint to learn something, and when you're doing the self-portrait, I'm curious, like, how does that differ? Because the time as compared to taking a selfie, that's very instantaneous.
Yeah.
We look back at that, and we have a certain sensation when we see our face. How does that compare, or does it at all, with looking back when you see your face in a painting?
That's a very interesting question, because I think that what I'm aiming at in the painting is not something where you would say, even looking at another self-portrait of mine that I did 2 years ago and say, well, this is definitely older. I mean, I'm not interested, I think with some people like Rembrandt, you can kind of do that because he was interested in a verisimilitude that was, he wanted something very specific. I'm not interested in that. I'm more interested in the structure of the form and in, I'm often seeing something accidentally in a mirror or in a, often it's in a, you know, you get used to your mirror at home, but if I see a mirror in a restroom, in a restaurant or something, the light's different and I suddenly see myself differently. And I often take my camera out and take pictures. One of the, one other little anecdote about that is that I do use the cell phone for pictures a lot. And then I put them on my computer and work from them, a lot of them. But what really is bothersome is when I push the button on the camera and it turns it around so I'm facing myself, and it scares me because my face isn't prepared. I'm not, and this is a prepared face. See, that's the difference.
Okay, I think we've got everybody down this way. And so I wanted to share an exciting bit of information too. If you've already received our members magazine for spring and summer, or if you haven't, it's hot off the presses, you could get a copy downstairs with all of our spring and summer programs and exhibitions. It also mentions that we were able to acquire this work for the JSMA's collection. Connie's been on my wish list curatorially and on our collections development plan for many years because she's an artist that was not in our collection yet. And we were able to remedy that, thankfully, this year. So this work will stay at the JSMA. You'll see it again in the future here. And yeah, we're so happy about that. Well, I'll hand this over to you. And thank you for being here.
Let's see, does that work? I'm a ceramicist, first and foremost, but I started as a painter many years ago and went into ceramics at the art school I attended, Cal Arts or Chenard Art Institute. And the teacher was so wonderful, and he said, if you come in, I'll teach you everything I know about painting on ceramics, which wasn't much. So eventually I journeyed to Italy, and I did it for a 10-year period, and I found a mentor. I didn't really study painting or do painting while I was there, but I observed and I found out where to buy my colors. And then I took off on a long journey, and now I'm moving back into, I'm doing ceramic bas-reliefs, but I'm painting wood that they are mounted on. And it's so much easier not to paint on ceramics. I am having such a good time because you put things in the kiln and they come out and you go, oh no. And so I am now controlling things so much, and it's so much more fun and free. If I paint something I don't like it, I can erase it. You can't do that. But one of the ways I remedied working with maiolica, which is the glaze technique I learned in Italy, is to go back in with China paint and metallics, China paints, and that helps a lot. And I think that one of my quests through the years has been the idea that the universe is sort of a vessel, and the planet is a hot boiling vessel with vessels running around all over it. We're all vessels. So I think I do the vessel, and then I do the surface, and it's mostly looking out from the vessel for me, not going into it once I've created the sculpture itself. And I've done busts, I've done animal busts, dog busts, human busts, and I've done birds, and I've done people and a totem kind of thing, and heads. And so I've always worked first from the idea of a vessel and then cover it with things that I observe on the planet or the universe or both, and because it's all vessel. And this one is talking about how we cover the planet, humans, with our own visions and ideas. And then the gulls are pulling it back into the natural world. But we are the natural world as well, so there's a little dichotomy there with that. And I had been on a journey. I lived in Canada for many years and was obsessed with Emily Carr. And so I went on a few journeys a few years ago back to visit her home residence in Victoria and then to visit the museum in Vancouver. And she was just a very psychedelic painter of that time. Just really got into the magic and amazement of the natural world. And there's even a book written about her called The Forest Lover. But I've read all her biographies, and she was a very brave woman who went up there and went into all the fjords and islands and recorded the totems and the Indian villages, and then kind of moved on into trees and things and plant forms. But she wasn't popular for most of her life. It took till she was in her 60s to get any recognition. So this was sort of the first thing I did after I came back, which is in honor of her in the totem situation. It's my idea of a totem in my own little weird way. So, I don't know. Anything else? Oh, the head. Yeah, the head. Well, once again, she's totally covered in nature, but then I wanted to make her golden because I think there are situations where we are golden, and it's usually when we are in sync with the planet that we live on. So that's what that's about. Plus, she's kind of a plant form person anyway.
Does it mention something about a tadpole shape here?
Oh, I don't really know. I just started building it, and she could be a cabbage. I'm not sure. And then she has the red tip, the hot hands. Yes, they're all hollow. All my sculptures are hollow. Oh, well, depends on how much I sculpt on them, but they probably start about 3/8 of an inch or more, and then, they can get pretty thin as I sculpt on them.
This is after, this is before you fire.
Yeah, sculpt before the fire, then surface it with glaze, and then paint on the really difficult to paint on glaze. It takes years. When I was in Italy, they said that Maiolica painters would not be able to paint anything of significance, usually the backside of platters, for years, because it's so strict a technique, really hard to make it flow on the glaze. And there's tricks, and in Italy, a lot of the people who do Maiolica, because it's very competitive there, and every town has a technique, they would save their secrets of how to make it work better till they were on their deathbed, and then they'd pass it out. And I have been working with it for years, but now I think I'm kind of moving away and going into bas-reliefs with painting on the wood and just sailing along so gleefully. So. Well, I kind of was determined by my ceramic teacher at Cal Arts, because he did take me into that. I became a ceramic major, and he did promise that he would teach me everything he knew about painting on ceramics. I don't know if anybody knows who Ralph Besser is. He was a wonderful professor. He taught us a lot about being practical as well as artists, which was great. And but he mainly China painted, and not at all where I wanted to go with it. So I just knew that eventually I would go to Italy and figure it out.
Where does this go that you couldn't get there otherwise?
There just is no true Maiolica technique in this country at all. I brought back all my colors. I have more than I'll ever need in a lifetime. Every time I go, I'd come back with more colors because they're geared to go into the glaze, and they're permanent. It's called in glaze. So it's not very surfacey. And there are other ways to paint on ceramics, but nothing quite like Maiolica. So Laura?
Are you painting on wood now? Are you thinking of combining the ceramic and?
They are combined, yeah.
Does one you have here have? wood?
No, this was, I took kind of a break after I got to a certain age and didn't have a major show. I'm going to have one in October at Russo Lee. And I only did group shows for a while and just, I needed to rest. I raised 2 kids on my own and I was doing ceramic tile murals and trying to intersperse them with shows, and I just needed a good rest, and I came back with much fresher in a way. I'm just opening up all kinds of doors of new ways of working with what I do and combining them. And it's
Which one's going to live here at the museum?
the big one, which making me happy. Yeah. So.
Could you just explain the problems of painting on glaze or glazed pots rather than wood? What are the real difficulties in doing it?
Okay, one thing is that you can't really go back in and erase. You could wash the glaze off and then refire it and start over again. That's a big pain in the butt. And you can scrape off little areas, like if you smear anything or anything, but you can't get real aggressive about it. And like there was a whole piece in the wood that I was painting that has a face on it and some other ceramic things. And I didn't like the way it was flowing, so I just slapped back more gesso and away I went painting it again. So there's a lot more freedom when you're painting, not on Maiolica, because it's very demanding and doesn't allow a lot of change. That's why I've gone back in with China paint through the years. And you don't know if the colors are going to turn out the way, and color balance is really important. And if it doesn't, then you can go in with China paint. And I might even start painting with paint on clay. In fact, I already have. I mean, why not? They're sculptures. Yeah. Anything else?
Do you draw out, plan out every side? I mean, on a paper?
No.
So
the sculptures, I actually work kind of like an architect. I draw them, and then I figure out how I can put them together as a three-dimensional. But the painting, I draw right on the glaze, and I have a trick now. It took me years. I use something that you put in ice cream called gum, CMC gum, and I mix it up with water, and if I paint it on the glaze, then the glaze isn't so absorbent or so wanting to, stop me from moving ahead on it. And that helps. Plus, you can draw on it and erase. But once you start with the paint, you got to keep going. So I did come up with something, though. I did a horse mural for a woman. She has 100 horses. And I wanted the opaqueness of the horse, so I came up with pointillism, where you can put in a wash, let it dry, you can put a hairdryer on it or put lights on it, and then you go back in and you do pointillism, and you keep building it up, but you have to let it dry every time or else you'll start pulling off the color. And that worked pretty well.
And then does it melt together? Or
it's still somewhat pointillist, yeah. But it got the horses just right with their glowing sides and flanks and all that. There.
Well, thank you again to all of our artists and to all of you for being here. And please come back and enjoy the show a few more times before it closes. And June 1st will be the first public on view day for our summer exhibition called What's New? Curatorial Conversations. So recent acquisitions and several gifts and purchases made in honor of our executive director, Jill Hart's upcoming retirement will be on view. So we hope you'll come back to the Barker Gallery in the summer to enjoy that show. And enjoy the rest of your day today. Thanks.